Thank you very much, and I'm kind of really very happy to be part of this conversation and discussion, which we had yesterday and today. I also remember Jim McAdams, when he was giving his honoris causa lecture on Wednesday here, you made the reference to our mission statement, and which says that I mean, whatever we do here at the university it's for the glory of God, the common good, and the dignity of the human person. And sometimes when I'm kind of having the conversations with my colleagues from other Ukrainian secular universities, I would rather begin. I wouldn't kind of begin with this kind of statement. I'd rather say, well, what we do here at the university, we are kind of educating our students for freedom. That's a kind of I think the message, the statement that might kind of they might try to get the sense, understand of. And eventually, this is what liberal education is about. I think it's about educating ourselves and our students for freedom. It's kind of very clear, but here where I think the problem begins, because I mean there are so many important things behind that concept of educating for freedom, and there is a formation and character formation behind that. I mean there is a whole kind of set of values which is presupposed for that. So that's the main challenge, which is basically behind that. Liberty is always a challenging goal for any given generation. And we have to go time and again through a challenge of achieving liberty or failing to do so. One thing we should be beware of is a temptation, to follow your pattern, is a temptation to outsource this kind of a constant achievement of a free society and sustainment of our freedom to something other than ourselves. The market itself isn't per se a source of a free society, nor is the state, nor current technology with its miraculous artificial intelligence potential. Generally speaking, the idea of outsourcing a free society project is an extremely risky and potentially very damaging endeavor from political, social, historical, anthropological, and moral viewpoints. Thus, the extent to which an idea of outsourcing a free society project embeds itself in the texture of our current public culture is proportionate to a risk of democracy mutations into a kind of totalitarianism, either manifested by a brutal repressive power of one ruler, or by a much softer despotism which deactivates civic responsibilities and disqualifies civic virtues. And the truth about post-truth is that whenever we decide to outsource the big things, such as our families, religious commitments, moral convictions, values, civic responsibilities, death, etc., which ultimately will enable us to receive our life as a gift and make a sincere gift of it, we end up dwarfing ourselves by self-confining ourselves to the pleasures as well as emergencies and fears of the now. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, in one of his articles entitled "In the Defense of Big Love," distinguishes between what he calls small and big loves in our lives. To illustrate his small versus big love demarcation, he makes a reference to our experiences of the beautiful versus the sublime. He then continues by saying that, quote, "The small attachments serve as the foundation of our emotional lives, but when you have a big love for your country or a cause, you are loving something that transcends a lifetime. You are pursuing some universal ideal and seeking excellence. A big love involves using power well, seeking honor and glory, and being worthy of them," end quote. Well, the observation he makes, reflecting on the current American attitudes, is that, quote, "In America today, some of the little loves are fraying, and big love is almost a foreign language," end quote. And he concludes his column by a very clear statement, quote, "Before the country can achieve great things, it has to relearn the ability to desire big things. It has to be willing to love again, even amid disappointments, to love things that are awesome, heroic, and sublime," end quote. Well, I hear in this something which might be a hint for the Catholic University's future agenda. In the times of the social turbulences and exponential technological growths, it would be critical to make oneself capable of embracing the challenges while, quote, loving something that transcends a lifetime. This is, by the way, where a true meaning of the word sustainability begins to reveal itself. There is no better way to set a sustainability attitude in motion other than to appropriate one's life by committing oneself to put his or her life to the service of the others, which is to make a gift of oneself. And by the way, the gift is also, to copy Brooks, almost a foreign language. And yet gift is something which should be reinvented as a new social innovation and embedded into the social texture of the 21st century. Receiving a gift and making a gift is at the very essence of being caring, social, political, sustainable, loving, in a word, being a human person. This is why making a gift of one's life attitude would qualify for a big law in Brooks' terms, which would help us to set a big agenda for the 21st century. How big? Well, big enough not to get caught by the comfort of the small, the average, the consumable, the insignificant, the entertainable, and often the meaningless. And also big enough to be able to withstand and not to get paralyzed by the fear of the unknown, the hardship, the immensity of suffering and abandonment. How about Pope Francis' call to holiness in his recent apostolic exhortation? Quote, "We are all called to be holy by living our lives with love and by bearing witness in everything we do, wherever we find ourselves. Are you in a position or authority? Be holy by working for the common good and renouncing personal gain." We at Oku happen to have a great man who was leading our church in the last century while holding and growing Oku at the heart of his activities. A man who boldly proclaimed, "Aspire for the great," to hit faithful in the face of the most inhumane and devastating Soviet totalitarianism. His name was Patriarch Joseph Slipy, and we today are internalizing his "Aspire for the great" call as our own attitude and extending university legacy and vision into the 21st century. I'd like to continue by making a reference to the most recent book by Thomas Friedman, "Thank You for Being Late," wherein he draws our attention to some conclusions made by Gallup researchers based on the results of the massive 2014 poll of the college graduates who had been in the workplace for at least 5 years. Here's a quote which I found very interesting. Quote, "We found no difference in terms of the type of institution you went to, public, private, selective or not, in long-term outcomes. How you got your college education mattered most." Please do not read this as saying that it does not matter whether we are Catholic now and will remain so in the future, or whether we get the state funding or rely upon different sources of income, etc. No, the point here is that the current educational market wants us to compete with house. It's pretty much about how we channel our Christian identity, experiences, values, worldview, and messages, as well as many other important things to the students. And this is something which I think should also get on our Catholic university's agenda, something that Jeffrey already has touched upon. And here is the second quote, which sheds some light on what is that how, which appeared to be so critically important in the eyes of the researchers. Quote, "Two experiences stood out from the poll of more than 1 million American workers, students, educators, and employers. Successful students had one or more teachers who were mentors and took a real interest in their aspirations, and they had an internship related to what they were learning in school. Those workers were twice as likely to be engaged with their work and thriving in their overall well-being," end quote. Again, what I'm hearing in this statement is what I would label a pedagogy of encounter, which respects and celebrates our humanity and personhood, and which certainly could be leveraged and unfolded in the settings of the Catholic universities. In his recent apostolic constitution, Veritatis Gaudium, Pope Francis introduced 4 criteria for the renewal of the Catholic universities. The first one on this list is our university community's willingness and commitment to, quote, discovering in the whole of creation the Trinitarian impact, and particularly discovering God in every human person," end quote. I would say that discovering God in every human person should stand at the very heart of the 21st century pedagogy of encounter and university education, serving our search for authenticity in the time of the multiple paradigm shifts. How do we make this concept working model? I'm not sure that a little upgrade of the existing approaches would do a job. Eventually, this is about bringing about a new social innovation in the field of education. Think, for example, of a concept of vocation, which in a way, some might say, makes a goal of becoming your own and winning your freedom more complex by adding a whole new dimension in your goal-setting process. There is no way to get the sense of your vocation without triggering a listening part of your goal-setting ego. In the religious terms, vocation is an image which loving divine other has of me, which is always more comprehensive than the picture I have of myself. It takes a special pedagogy to properly awaken, enrich, and to contextualize our inwardness and immanence by our ability to transcend ourselves. This is, by the way, why UKU emphasis on martyrs and marginalized is an important effort in helping our students to get the major in applied humanity. I think martyrs and marginalized pedagogy we are experimenting with and emphasizing in the UKU is a kind of social innovation which with the fascinating potential for the 21st century educational model. Let me conclude by offering you two very short quotes from the most recent book by Timothy Snyder entitled On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. The first quote draws our attention to the language we speak, and the second has to do with Snyder's call for a corporeal politics. Snyder, as a world-caliber historian of the 20th century, reminds us people of the 21st century how unexpectedly for ourselves we might compromise our freedom for totalitarianism. Here is the first quote. Be kind to our language. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey that thing you think everyone else is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books, end quote. And this is the second one, quote, power wants your body softening in your chair and your emotions dissipating on the screen. Get outside. Put your body in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people, end quote. Essentially, Snyder is drawing our attention to some very basic and healthy approaches to overcome and avoid the temptations of totalitarianism. He's proposing read, talk, and write, and walk and meet people strategies not to get lullabied by the motives and behavior which seductively might at first seem quite natural and uncontroversial in themselves. Thus, Snyder's recommendation is, do not aim at outsourcing your capacity to comprehend the things and to articulate the meanings, as well as do not neglect your potential for experiencing fully corporeal encounters, friendships, and communication. Well, I started with a kind of outsourcing question, and I'm concluding with it. Outsourcing has become a powerful technology of its own, driving our economy, business, and the social, and the universities have played a role in it. I'm afraid we have crossed the line, and the time has come to seriously concentrate on what is not outsourceable when it comes to a free and virtuous society project for the 21st century. Thank you.